when I was at Ohio State, I really, really dove deeply into my faith and really began to see that there was a disconnect between folks who had all the right words to say or memorized all the right verses or scriptures, and then maybe didn't live out a life of faith or walk the talk, as we would have said.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce himself. Adam, please go ahead.
Thanks for having me, Maurice. My name's Adam Phillips. I'm the CEO of Interfaith America. Have served in a number of various capacities at the intersection of faith and public life. Most recently, was serving in the Biden administration, leading localization and faith-based work for USAID.
Yeah, and that's how we got to know each other. And
Yeah.
now, how long are you with the Interfaith America?
We moved here to Chicago 2 years ago this week. I
Okay.
think like 2 years ago today, we landed in Chicago and moved into our house. And
Uh-huh.
but I've been CEO for the past 9 months.
Okay.
I was appointed CEO on March 1st, but came in a little over 2 years ago to work at Interfaith America.
Cool. Okay. And we will talk about the work that you're doing now. But first, I would like to ask you to hear a bit about your upbringing, your family, early faith experiences, and the communities or mentors that shaped your path into public service and interfaith work, and where there may be some moments or influences that set you on that trajectory you're on today.
Mm. I grew up in California, but was born in Ohio and ended up graduating from high school in Ohio, and so I have this kind of Midwest and West Coast upbringing. It really came of age, I think, in San Diego, California, where I first started to ask kind of um, what faith was. I didn't grow up in a particularly religious household. My parents would have identified as Christians, but we didn't go to church. We would kind of go maybe Christmas Eve or whatnot. And I, in middle school, started to really wonder about a story that was bigger than the one I had in my neighborhood, bigger than the one I had in the 90s, and thinking about kind of what might be some ways to think about growing up and becoming a man and being a human and a neighbor, looking to ancient traditions. So I went to church with whomever would take me. Saw everything. I went to mass. Kind of traditional mainline Protestant worship. Went to some pretty interesting, energizing, mm, somewhat Pentecostal evangelical worship experiences, youth groups, and really found a home in all of those places in some ways. So I've kind of packed my bags along the way as my spiritual suitcase to really lean on a richly diverse Christian tradition. My family goes to an Episcopal church now, but I've also planted churches in the evangelical tradition, so I've seen a lot. Could speak to a lot of that. One couple people that come to mind when I think about my early influences. One would be a teacher I had in eighth grade, Mr. Madkins, who's a Vietnam vet, African American man, and taught me a lot about what it meant to be uh, an American. I remember vivid stories. This was kind of a social studies history class, and Mr. Madkins helped me understand the nation's history in ways that I had never really thought about. And He taught me about Supreme Court cases and Plessy versus Ferguson, thinking about equal rights for all. And he also taught me about coming home from Vietnam. I remember this very, very vivid day that he kind of did every year, I think, for the eighth graders, because I remember other classes coming into the classroom and sitting there, and he brought his boots and he put his boots on the table in front of us and talked about coming home from the war, and instead of ticker tape parades, being spit on and called a loser or a traitor. And just thinking about this young man who was dedicated to serving his country, and then in his older age, dedicated to serving students at public high school, public middle school, um, taught me a lot about the tensions around all of these big, big, big issues. And so I've carried that story with
Mm,
me for some time. And more recently, a really important teacher of mine, a mentor and friend, has been Father Richard Rohr. When I was about a decade ago going through some pretty hard things, vis-a-vis the culture wars and all the division we find ourselves in, I had some friends send me to a 2-day retreat with Father Richard. Kind of stumbled in there, kind of trying to figure out who I was and where I was going with my own faith journey as I approached 40. And and he really helped put me back together again, to help me root down in a more contemplative way, to not see that my story was ending because of some conflict and getting kicked out of a denomination over LGBTQ inclusion, but to really see that um, I was part of a greater lineage of believers and followers of Jesus who sought to bridge divides and welcome the stranger, and also be more contemplative and meditative in our approach, rather than always kind of a us versus them combative approach to social justice.
mm. And how did the two of you meet?
I mean, I went to this 2-day retreat, and then through a mutual friend, ended up getting a cup of coffee, and then that's the story. I was a student at the Living School, which is this incredible program that the Center for Action and Contemplation put on, where you journey with other travelers in the contemplative way. Did that for 2 years. I've gone to New Mexico on a number of kind of pilgrimages or retreats, and been able to spend some one-on-one time with Father Richard. Even got to go to Assisi. Happened to be in Assisi in Italy at the same time, and met up with him, and just sort of looking at the Franciscan way, and
Mm,
um, just these touchstones along the way to help me kind of repack my bags, if you will. I like
mm,
this walk, talk, listen. Like, how, what are you walking with in your bag? The things you carried, as the novel goes. So yeah, that's how we met, and just saw him a couple weeks ago at a major conference, and it was fun to catch up.
yeah, great. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating figure. Do you have any siblings, by the way?
Yes, my sister Lauren is 4 years younger and lives here in the city of Chicago as well,
Okay.
and she has a husband and a daughter, my niece Dottie, who's 6 months younger than my son Desmond, and they kind of call themselves sister, brother, cousins. They've grown up together, and it's such a blast.
Yeah, that's nice to have family close by. Um, but yeah, what I'm always interested in, because you kind of explained your path, right, in your search.
Mm.
Was that similar for your sister?
You know, I think she's had her own kind of spiritual journey. We in high school we ended up going to a church a little bit, and she certainly has her own spiritual journey. But no, they're very different. Like, I think we see
Mm.
the world incredibly similar ways, but also like our practices and attendance in church is different. So yeah, it's really interesting how that worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I was always fascinated to hear in terms of sometimes it's the same, sometimes very, very different.
Yeah.
How and you grow up in the same environment, right? And of course you're different individuals, but it's yeah, I find it interesting. Um, you know, you worked across ministry, diplomacy, development, interfaith, leadership, civic advocacy. What's the through line for you? What drives you in life? And what would motivate you to walk an extra mile? Well, you know that this podcast, or maybe
Yeah.
you don't know, is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I've been doing since 2012. I just finished another one. Um, yeah, why would you walk, 100 miles? What drives you?
Yeah. It's funny, my kind of career has makes a lot of sense in my spirit and in my
Mm-hmm.
person, but might not make a lot of sense on paper. I've been a pastor, I've planted churches, I've led advocacy efforts around the Sustainable Development Goals, or what we used to call the Millennium Development Goals. Um, been in government, worked on political campaigns, now do bridge building work with Interfaith America. And for me, the through line has always been, how do you root down in your faith to seek the greater good or the common good? And for me, that's always been since, I think when I was at Ohio State, I really, really dove deeply into my faith and really began to see that there was a disconnect between folks who had all the right words to say or memorized all the right verses or scriptures, and then maybe didn't live out a life of faith or walk the talk, as we would have said. Um, and for me, the through line has been this kind of notion of a public faith for the common good, but also how do you bridge across difference to tackle the real issues of the day, whether it might be hunger or poverty, um, whether it might be HIV/AIDS or COVID, or sometimes rolling up your sleeves and trying to get your candidate elected to office because you think that that would be the contribution to the common good for the moment. So I kind of, that's the through line for me, and it continues.
Okay. Do you feel, because 9 months ago, then you're now the CEO of Interfaith America. Are you home now? I mean, are you,
I'm in
or
my
is
home
to
office,
yeah,
yes.
no, I mean, sorry, I mean more like, you have done different things, right? Does this feel like, okay, everything that I'm interested in, that I'm passionate about, is
Yeah.
embodied by Interfaith America, or is it
Yeah.
too early to tell?
My mom, growing up, had this sign, like a piece of art in the house that said "Home is where the heart is,"
Hmm.
and it's kind of like a very simple message. But we moved around a lot, so I've kind of not known where home physically has been at times, and that's been a pursuit for the better part of my adult life. Like, where am I at home? And yes, this certainly does feel like home. But USAID felt like home, and leading a church in Portland felt like home, and
Mm,
so it's like, how do you, I don't know, that notion of being a pilgrim or a sojourner in a land not your own. How do you be at home and lean in? And being a dad also really helps me be at home, and um, my marriage and my life with my wife Sarah. So like these things further make me feel at home. But yeah, I think the great part about working in Interfaith America and being really honored to lead this institution as CEO in this time is that I'm able to bring together a wide array of experiences and even relationships with folks that we don't agree on a whole host of things, but we agree on how do you seek the common good together despite our differences. How do you, as we say, respect, relate, and cooperate for common cause? And um, yeah, this feels like the culmination of a lot of previous experiences, in some ways, or just at least an extra continuation of what it means to serve in the world and to serve with others, even though you might not entirely agree.
mm. And can you maybe share for the listeners, like, what what is your organization exactly doing, or give a couple of examples?
Yeah, for sure. Interfaith America is a 22-year-old organization
Mm,
that was started by my friend and founder Ibu Patel, who's still with us as our founder and president. And We seek to activate leaders for the common good, for civic pluralism, for bridging across difference. We work in a few different areas of real importance, I think, to our democracy as Americans. We work in higher ed. We work in what we call civic spaces, where civil society, nonprofits, election work, again, all nonpartisan. And we also work in corporate spaces and workplaces, which also includes our um, health work. So, how do you bridge across difference on your college campus? How do you bridge across difference in your public square? How do you work across different lines of identities and diversities in the workplace? That's what we do, and we provide some ways to think through that, as well as some trainings to help both leaders and their communities level up and lean in and be the kind of bridge builders or interfaith leaders. And when we say interfaith, we mean people of a wide array of faiths and identities, even no particular religious tradition, but we all kind of, as Lou Reed, the great rock and roll star, said, it takes a busload of faith to get by. And so, how do you bring yourself into the workplace or into the college campus or into the public square and offer your contributions with others, knowing that um takes a lot of ways to do that
Mm,
across difference, especially in this day and age.
okay. Hey, if I ask you, okay, what is something that you are doing or your organization is doing at the moment that you're most excited about? What would
Yeah,
that be?
yeah. We have this great project called Team Up,
Uh-huh.
which is a collaboration between Catholic Charities, the YMCA, Habitat for Humanity, and Interfaith America. And what's really cool about Team Up is that you've got these organizations that provide a lot of kind of service delivery, um, immediate needs. But they also kind of represent this broad swath of American institutions that ordinary Americans and neighbors from all walks of life really interact with. Other organizations that might not be quite part of that effort, but you can think of like your Salvation Armies. You can think about your national and local Jewish associations, and these places where it might be a food pantry or it might be a community center. We've got this is what it means to be faithful in America. That you're kind of in the neighborhood. And this really cool team up project in New Mexico, we've been telling this story about, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Catholic Charities, and others are working to welcome Muslim refugees in New Mexico, the land of enchantment. This is this incredible state with rich diversity. So it's really fun to see, just kind of hidden in plain sight all around us as Americans, people of very, very different faiths and backgrounds, not just working together, but really interdependently part of one another's stories. So I really encourage folks to check that video out. We've got that
Mm.
up on our social media channels. It's on YouTube. But yeah, Team Up is one of my favorite programs at the moment. But I could tell awesome stories about some of our work in the healthcare sector, some of our work with like Fortune 500 companies and college campuses as well.
Okay. No, and we will make sure that we
Yeah.
mention the website and the social media handles of Interfaith America in the podcast notes. Um, I mean, in contrast to USAID, you now work, I think, solely on the US, right? It's not outside. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're focused entirely on domestic issues here in
Domestic
America.
issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're enthusiastic about Team Up. There are all other things that you're doing, which are great. But what are some of the challenges that you're facing in the work today?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I think we are maybe at one of the most divided times, at least in our lifetimes here in the United States, when it comes to politics, when it comes to culture, and we see that as really troubling to how we might be neighbors and how we might be builders of institutions that really work to seek the greatest good in the world. And so, we're a nonpartisan organization, but we're also trying to live out this work in a context and an operating environment, as I might have said when I was back at USAID, that is very complex and fraught with real challenges when it comes to what does it mean to be a pluralist society, and what does it mean to be um, the world's oldest and possibly most diverse democracy in human experience. And so, how do you do diversity and democracy work in 2025? How do you think about our upcoming celebration and marking of 250 years since the Declaration of Independence here in the U.S.? We've been thinking about a lot of that, and it's really tough work when people have a lot of different definitions of what it means to be an American, or what it means to be a person of faith, or what are the ways in which we might interact with one another in our shared experiences. But I think that's where the real work is, and it's rewarding, even though it's incredibly difficult.
Bridging, that's a word you used, right? And
Yeah.
um, conversation, dialogue. I often come up with a skit from Sesame Street to make a point, and that's about when Ernie, um, wants to learn how to play the saxophone. And Ernie always walks around with his ducky, and so he's playing. I don't know if you know the song "Put Down the Ducky." It's on YouTube
Yeah.
as well. And so at a certain moment, his band, the owl, is saying, his band leader, if you really want to learn how to play the saxophone, you need to put the ducky down, your ducky down.
Mhm.
So, and I think that's a good kind of, a metaphor for, we have all of us have something that we love or fear. But if you want to have that conversation, you need to put that down. It doesn't mean that you cannot pick it up, but you need to put that down. What
Mhm.
is your ducky?
What a great question. What's my ducky? When I hear that, and I remember that skit from Sesame Street. The ducky could be something you cling to because that helps you navigate your fears or anxieties. It could be old habit or old patterns as well. I think the ducky that I have, probably have multiple duckies, and they probably are around kind of preconceived notions of how and how to navigate conflict and division, and who to avoid or not avoid, or who to work with and walk with, or even walk, talk, and listen to, as you've been saying. I think my duckies are probably old patterns of ways I've navigated, even partisan politics. I'm very proud of my work in political engagement, and think that that really matters. But how do you not see the world entirely as a zero sum game, but as a way in which you might yeah, lay down your arms, maybe, or lay down your duckies. That's always important to ask.
A lot is going on, polarization, etc. Where do you still see hope, though?
Hmm. I mean, I see hope like in odd places,
Mm.
and I see hope where you are sharing space with others. I mean, I wouldn't say an airport is usually a hopeful place, but where else do you encounter people that you might not ever hang out with, or talk to? I see sometimes hope in just at the gate, waiting for my plane, looking at other passengers and small talk over what they're reading, or the shirt they're wearing. If it's a team or a band. I see hope in my kids' elementary school. This is really cool neighborhood here in Chicago, with a lot of diversity and a lot of really interesting families and kids, and I see hope walking Desmond to school, and I also see hope, um, in kind of old poems. I've been reading, going back to some old poems by William Blake and Czeslaw Milosz and some others, that are food for the journey.
Maybe piggybacking on your airport, where you have these short
Yeah,
moments with other people, and it's the connection, right? So that's the
yeah,
start of
yeah.
potential dialogue. So I'm going to connect you with the previous guest, and the previous guest has a question for you.
A lot of people feel like they're losing hope. If somebody were to begin in the world of activism or doing some sort of humanitarian work in their community, what kind of suggestions would you give to them?
Yeah, I would take a take a walk around the community and see where the need is. I would kind of take a long walk around the community, and that's probably both literal and metaphorical. And really do like an analysis of like who's doing what, where, what's missing, who could you maybe join in with? Could be a church group, uh, it could be right there at the community garden, or the farmers market. Could be a political action group. Could be something that's just you see posted at the coffee shop. But I'd really try to find folks that were looking to be constructive builders, that folks that were not looking to tear down or criticize, but certainly bring critical skills and critical analysis and engagement. And but to be folks that are looking to be problem solving, solution oriented, or as Mr. Rogers would have said, the helpers. When something's going down in the neighborhood, you look for the helpers. And so, what would it look like for you to be a helper? And then I would also encourage folks to uh, adopt some sort of spiritual practice. That thinking about my work with the Living School and Father Richard, and kind of adopting this mm, meditative practice I have, that's been a gift to me, but seeing that as having a contemplative gaze on the world, not just as like a prayer practice for my personal self, but as a living practice looking out at the world around me. um, it's helped me kind of erase the binaries and hold in tension the messy and the complicated, and knowing that I only have my own contribution to make, but we may never see the end of the story on the thing we're trying to solve. Um, a spiritual practice is meaningful. I think could be journaling, could be doesn't have to be religious. But what does it look like for you to spiritually walk, talk, and listen to others as you lean in and try to make good in the world? I think you know fret fret not around all of the hard. It's very hard right now, and yet the world is waiting for each of us to show up and do our own part. Um, I just saw Patti Smith, the great 78-year-old now musician, and I saw her with my mom, and she has a song called "The Peaceable Kingdom," and talks about you know the potentiality of the world around us actually getting better, and that it will get better one day. And so to hold on to those promises as hopes also matter.
Yeah, I actually let me piggyback on the music, and if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that, for the big part, embodies what you are about, which song or piece of music would that be, and why?
I'm very uh, drawn to music, actually, and the other side of my laptop, I have my records over there, my vinyl, and we have little dance parties in our house
Right.
from time to time with our son and with others. I grew up with MTV, actually, as a sort of quasi babysitter at times. My mom had MTV on in the background, and early vivid memories of Live Aid, which was an attempt to really do right by those suffering in the Ethiopian famine. But the song I was talking about, Patti Smith, and I've been listening to the song over and over again, and it's maybe because I'm thinking about power right now, and I'm actually writing a book on power. But she has this amazing song called "People Have the Power," and she talks about this kind of dream landscape she had when one night, and she's sort of seeing the leopard and the lamb laying together, truly bound, and to know in her dreaming that God knows a pure view. But this line that just gets me every time is kind of the refrain of the song. It's like the people have the power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. It's to create the people rule. It's to create the people rule. And I just love that. I love that, like, unabashed optimism and belief that if we do our part, we can make a big change. Um, because it gets tricky. It does feel overwhelming at times that change can't happen. That change for the common good can't happen. That change pursuing the global goals can't happen. That we just have so many insurmountable barriers to the things that we know might make life better for others. But yeah, putting Patti Smith on in my ears and getting on the train and headed downtown to work. That's how I get by sometimes.
That's great. And so I will make sure that I add
Yeah.
her song to a playlist that we developed on Spotify. And when you search for hashtag Walk Talk Listen, you see all the songs that have been selected by my guests, and it's awesome. It's of course very diverse. Um, what I forgot to ask you is yeah, your question for the next guest.
I would love to ask the next guest, as we walk into America 250 in 2026. Again, thinking about 250 years since the signing of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. What stories might Americans lift up and elevate and remember? And what stories still need to be written as Americans to fulfill those promises? Whether you're an American or not, I think this question really matters in 2026.
Great, beautiful, and important question. Um, Adam, you spend time with young people on campuses, in congregations, and civic spaces. What trends do you see among youth today in terms of faith, spirituality, and interfaith engagement?
I see like a real leap forward in some regards, or at least changing of the guard in terms of the ways in which people think you should think about things. Or I see a real hunger, and it's got to be because of all the decade of division we've had. Um, Likely also because of COVID and the social isolation that coming out of these like constraining like binaries of us versus them, or these narratives that we've held on to maybe for 50 or 100 years or more. I see at least the young people I'm interacting with across political spectrums saying, "Hey, why are we doing it this way? And can we think about doing it a different way?" You've seen that when it comes to free speech and the power of protest. You see that in folks looking for ways to root down in their own spiritualities. Saw a story and anecdotally can say yes to this, that there's an increase of young men going to church, and what kind of churches they're going to. They're going to Catholic and Orthodox churches, which isn't sort of like in the script. when you think about revival in America. So I just see a real openness of younger folks to say, what if we did something different, or what if we thought about this differently? And that causes a lot of agita for maybe some of us, but I think it's really good because it reflects agency, and it reflects that folks want to really lean in and live out their lives to do the walk. And so I still have tons to learn from these folks, these young friends and colleagues and neighbors and people I don't know.
You talking about the youth, are we good in really making them part of the conversation? Or
Oh no, I don't think we are, because we some of us are trying our best. But I think this moment that we find ourselves in is a real inflection point on shared life. We could talk about the economy. We could talk about um, church or congregational attendance. We could talk about even our institutions. I lead a relatively young institution at 20, 22, 23, 24 years of age, but I've been engaging with institutions that are 50 years or even 100 years old, and you're seeing a real challenge to um, adapt to the new and adapt to the moment. And you see a generational divide that I think is more pronounced than ever, at least in my experience, in my lifetime, um, where um, folks are living longer and have vested interest in things. And a new crop is coming up, and they're not interested in these institutions. And so the desire to even perpetuate institutions could be a congregation, could be you know an educational institution. Uh, there's a real challenge between the gap between boomers and zoomers, I think. And how do you make space to make decisions? How do you make space to welcome others? I think we can get a lot better at that, and I'm hopeful that we can in the years ahead, because that's going to be the real secret, I think, to getting through some of this mess we find ourselves in.
Mm, okay, yeah, no, the youth, they very often come up in terms of when I ask the questions, where do you still see hope? And but then when I tell this answer to a younger person, and they said, you cannot put this all on our shoulders. You are the reason that we are in this mess.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting dynamic.
Well, and if I can add, it
Yeah.
gets worse for a younger generation when you see the wealth extraction happening.
Mm,
Um, we've had some of the greatest transfer of wealth out of the future, for Zoomers and uh, Gen Alpha, Gen Y, millennials, et cetera. We're borrowing on their futures, and we're seeing a real crisis when it comes to not just the wellness of our institutions, but the ability to have affordable housing. We have this really, I think, troubling economy bubbling up around us, where if you're older, you might be doing all right, but if you're younger, you've got even more barriers than ever before, and that's a real concern.
mm. Maybe this is a good segue talking about sustainability and the SDGs.
Mm, mhm.
Given your experience at USAID and your work across nearly 100 countries, um, what do you like the listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, these 17 goals for sustainable development, I think really capture kind of where we can go as people, as communities, as countries, as international bodies, as a world community. It's completely possible in our lifetime to seek, the end to extreme poverty, to make sure that folks have decent work and economic growth, as I was sharing around the generational kind of divides, to think about reduced inequalities, to ensure gender equality, quality education. These things are doable. And yet we find ourselves facing an insurmountable amount of barriers to achieving these things. I think about climate action. I think about sustainability and just even your own local communities, or on the land. Um, I think for those of us that truly believe in the Sustainable Development Goals, and as I was saying, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, which were a precursor, how do we um, walk, talk, but also listen on these matters? How do we think about ways in which even how we frame these 17 goals and whatnot, might in fact provide barriers to others joining in to be part of the problem solving? Maybe how do you think about the language we use around, um, for some they might call it creation care or conservation. For others, we might call it climate action. What are the ways we can go above and beyond our own um, kind of uh, places of work and worship, and at times even echo chambers, to break through those barriers, to enlist everyone we possibly can to build bigger tents to seek these global goals? Because it can't just be one subset of our communities or our countries. It can't just be one party. It can't just be one faith community. We've got to find ways to bridge across these differences, which includes listening and learning maybe other ways to frame the goals that could enlist folks, you know, that you would maybe never imagine would work with you on this. But we saw this with the one campaign when I was there. Um, you know, we would often talk about the strange bedfellows that were fighting HIV/AIDS together, the unusual suspects. How do you get someone you think is the most, you know, right wing, conservative politician and the most kind of so called left wing, progressive faith leader to be in the same room, even maybe on the same screen, working hand in hand
Yeah.
to tackle HIV/AIDS in Africa? It made sweeping changes to communities in sub-Saharan Africa, and it meant the difference between a death sentence, and a beautiful, flourishing life, with life-saving drugs. 20 cents a day, to do these antiretroviral drugs. That took politicians, that took um, folks in the military and security communities, and that took religious folks, whether they were, church ladies in basements, or whether they were chaplains on college campuses, imams, rabbis, priests, um, pastors, people that don't agree on a whole lot of things, could agree on that one thing. And so, how do we not just be dogmatic in the ways in which we communicate these SDGs, and seek policy solutions, but how do we kind of pull back the aperture and widen the tent? I think something quite um, special might happen if we did that.
Mm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. What I hope that the organization I work for at the moment, JLI, we work on
Mhm.
in the nexus of religion and development. And have tried to say, I think JLI needs to be the translator to help to bring people together, and that's exactly what you're alluding to as well. What fascinates me though, in terms of the SDGs in the US, is that do you see them showing up in meaningful ways across civic, interfaith, or community spaces in the US? Because when I go to Sweden, when I go to the Netherlands, when I go to Kenya, I come across the SDGs, the language, the posters.
Yeah.
Um, well, I see them here at the UN, but outside then.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you see? And why might there be a difference, in the way we are handling it within this country?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have a real cold culture war in the United States that I've lived with my entire life. Um, and you can talk about why that has happened, and um, there are good reasons and terrible reasons why that's happened. But there's something special about the United States in which if we can break through this culture war, which is increasingly becoming a hot culture war, um, we might be able to literally offer something important to the rest of the world. I don't know how to get there, but I do know that, in my work with churches the last 20 years, especially, um, working with evangelicals from the global South, as we would describe um, them, folks from Southeast Asia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, on and on and on. You see something different than you might see with evangelicals and Catholics, especially in the United States, where we are pretty divided or concerned around kind of um, partisan politics. Evangelicals from the global South. I think about friends in the greater Micah movement, the Micah Challenge communities around the world. Um, these are folks that really have a holistic view on how to live out one's faith, and that includes the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. That includes climate climate action. Um, they really are not divided amongst themselves as they are as we are here.
Have you come across the inner development goals?
The what goals?
The inner development goals.
No, no, no. I'd love to know what that is.
Okay, so this is, a growing group of people mentioned, one of the reasons that we are not reaching those SDGs is, those require system and structure changes. And if you don't pay proper attention to the abilities, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community, then you will have a problem. So they did a survey, actually two surveys, and they came up with 5 inner development goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And under those 5 inner development goals, initially 23, but now they expanded it to 25 skills. They identified things like empathy, critical thinking. And the last two that have been added to those 5 inner development goals are forgiveness and resilience.
Yeah.
So, um, as someone who leads leaders and institutions, what resonates with you about developing inner capacities, and what do you think we overlook maybe?
I think that's been a missing part of the equation. I love the inner development goals. The way you've put it, I'm going to look into those, because I think for those of us that have been seeking social change through policies and government action and international bodies like the UN, we can sometimes get bogged down and if the policy just got right, or if this implementing partner just got more funds, then this issue could be fixed, or these folks could get access to clean water or hunger. But we are not actually thinking about this in terms of human dignity and not just handouts. That's a too simple way of putting it, but it the solutions to the challenges we have cannot just be these big policy platforms and INGOs making change through access to better education or clean water or food or on and on and on. Developing human capital, human resilience, this notion of really dignity in the other. Again, not uh, to be over dedicated to just handouts, which is not what I know people are doing through the SDGs, but it can also often be misconstrued that we aren't thinking about the inner life of one. And certainly, I wouldn't want to prescribe what that inner life would look like, but these inner development goals you described, I mean, resilience, problem solving, just ways of knowing and being in the world, I think truly matter. And you see that most often in faith communities. I've seen that in Kenya at a local masjid, where a local mosque, where they're working with the Assemblies of God congregation down literally the dirt road to get shots in arms on COVID. But they're also having, scripture studies, and they're having community-based learning where they're working through conflict and conflict mitigation. And the work they were doing together to solve COVID is also related to the work they were doing later in the year on free, fair, and safe elections. And in Kenya, that's pluralism is a big concern as well. There's so much tribal conflict as well as some religious conflict. So really, we can't just solve these issues with like outside program and policy solutions. They've got to come from one's inner life, and how do we help cultivate that and instill that in others. In my tradition, and I've been thinking a lot about this because I'm preaching a sermon on this in a few days. Uh, Jesus talks about the kingdom of God is within each of us, and that light of the peaceable kingdom, as Patty Smith might have called it, or calls it, is possible. It's really within each of us. And one final thought on this, Desmond Tutu, we named our son Desmond after him, the Archbishop. He talked about no future without forgiveness, and the getting out of the horrors of the apartheid era in South Africa required immense inner work and spiritual work around notions of forgiveness. And that matters more than ever today, I think.
Mm. Um, yeah, thanks, Adam. I mean, these conversations always go fast. I still have two quick questions for you. One is, yeah, what message, invitation, or question would you like to share with the listeners?
What message, invitation, or
Question would you like to share with the
question?
listeners?
Yeah. Hmm. What might the inner development goals look like for each of you? What might it look like to um, this idea of forgiveness? What goes back to the rubber ducky? Who do you need to forgive or let go of to move forward in your work as activists or as community leaders or as institutional leaders? Um, and then the invitation is also to think about who are the folks that might not be part of your work quite yet that might join in, or you might join in with them uh, in this era of real high and serious division.
Yeah, before I thank you, is there any question that I did not ask you today that I should have asked you?
No, this has been very good. It's been a very lovely chat.
Great. Then I would like to wish you all the best with everything you do and who you are. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really sure the listeners as well. So yeah, take good care, and until we meet again.
Thank you, Maurice.
Okay.
Likewise.
Bye bye.
Let's go the extra mile. Let's go. Maybe it ain't just time. Let's go. Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.